Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Open Infrastructure Day UK. It's the first Open Infra Day in the UK, so it's a new brand of events that we started to introduce over the last year. And it sounded appropriate to kick off this event by explaining what that event actually means and give you the OpenStack Foundation perspective on what we're trying to achieve here. The OpenStack Foundation, as the name implies, was formed around OpenStack. OpenStack is, as you probably all know by now, an open source cloud framework. It was originally formed by an open collaboration between Rackspace and NASA. So an open source cloud framework is basically a bunch of APIs that sit on top of virtualized resources, virtualized compute, storage, and networking resources. And the original goal here was to combine the needs of the public clouds as represented by Rackspace and the need of the private clouds as represented by NASA. And to do that in an open source, fully open source, not open core way, that would be inclusive of everyone's contribution and have as many people come in as possible. So OpenStack started with this very strong project focus. We were basically solely focused on the production of OpenStack software. I was really great in the early days to capture, initially form this community, capture all the excitement that was sent toward the technology in 2010, and grow the project to the size it is today. At the same time, we adopted a product approach to the marketing strategy. It would be mostly positioned as an alternative to established products in the market. So back then, VMware was basically owning the private infrastructure space. So people would say that OpenStack is an alternative to VMware on the private infrastructure side. Or you would have Amazon Web Services on the public cloud side, and would say, well, if you want to build an alternative to Amazon Web Services, you probably could use OpenStack, or it would be positioned against Eucalyptus, which was back then the open source solution of choice for cloud frameworks. But after some time came a point where this project focus and this product-centric strategy was hurting more than it helped. With a very strong project focus like this, basically nothing exists beyond your community. So it's at the peak of excitement, when you have lots of resources, it's really tempting to have your community expand to do everything. And if, as like always, basically you would end up having your community do everything rather than collaborate with existing communities that could do the job as well. And at some point, a new technology comes by, and it's very difficult to integrate with them or collaborate with them if you have this cultural, internal facing focus on purely your project. Another recent evolution that we saw over the past year is that there was a lot of outside interest from new nascent open source communities interested in openly collaborating. They would come to the OpenStack Foundation because they liked the way we supported those open collaborations, both on the downstream side and the upstream side. So that created a bit of a change in the thinking at the foundation. Same time, OpenStack was thrown at new use cases that were not the target of the project originally, like Edge or industrial IoT. And trying to support all those slightly overlapping use cases into a single project can make it unnecessarily complex. Like you have a single product needs to fit all the use cases, then it's not that great of an experience for the project itself. And finally, going to the OpenStack Days we were organizing and meeting with our users there and seeing that they had access to all those great open source technologies, but their real challenge was in integrating and deploying them and maintaining them, and seeing how difficult that was, how they were suffering from the lack of end-to-end testing, the lack of further collaboration between communities. It was a revelation that really pointed for me to integration being the last blocker to further open source adoption in that space. So at that point, it was basically last year, we decided to shift the discussion from being project-oriented, basically building OpenStack, creating a solution, building a product, building software, to being goal-oriented, solving more of a problem space, integrating various solutions to that effect, not just the projects that you're supporting. Basically supporting open infrastructure rather than just OpenStack. And that's where clarity came to me as to what the role of the OpenStack Foundation should be. And it goes way beyond producing OpenStack. And it goes back to the title of this talk, Openly Developing Open Infrastructure. And so what do I mean by that? So I'll split it. We'll start with explaining openly developing. So OpenStack, when we started with this crisp set of principles that reflected how we openly collaborate between equals on a level playing field. And those are the 4 opens: open source, not open core. Everything we do is open source. We don't set aside a number of specific features for a proprietary product that would not be open source. We do open development, which means that everything that's happening within development should be transparent and accessible to everyone. We do open design, which is the idea that the software should not be designed by a separate group of developers behind closed doors. It should be done within the community with everyone involved, including users, and doing that on open medium like mailing lists or during our community events. And finally, open community, which is the idea that anyone can join the community, anyone can become a leader in that community, whatever organization they happen to work for or not working for. So the idea here is that anyone can participate on a level playing field, and contribution should be our only currency. So that's the base set of principles we started with. We believe in a few other things as well. First is that we believe that free software needs free tools. So if you're using proprietary platforms to develop your open source software, you're not completely free. You're basically tied to the limitations and the whims of your proprietary service provider. So if you hit a limit there, well, you can't really force them to implement like extra scalability or anything. And if you displease the company that runs your proprietary service, they can just boot you off the boat anytime. In the terms of service, they just can remove your project, and then you're basically stuck with thousands of developers and 200 patches per day that can't really merge anymore. So it's a significant risk for your project, and I would argue that OpenStack would not be in the place it is today if we had started on a proprietary software platform like GitHub originally. Another thing we believe strongly in is the importance of QA and continuous integration. We had this saying at the start of OpenStack that if it's not tested, it's broken. So we place an enormous amount of importance on automated testing. And we used strict gating, which means that if a change does not pass tests, you can't really override that. You have to fix the test in order to be able to merge the change. So those are the principles that we use to sustain the open development of OpenStack. As a result, we are not using GitHub, and that creates a bit of difficulty to onboard new developers because everyone is very familiar with the GitHub workflow, and we are using an open source based project infrastructure that is only using open source tools, but has its own specific workflow. So our challenge here is the need to educate more and more people to the project infrastructure that we created. And therefore, to embody those values beyond OpenStack and bring them to new projects, we started a new initiative called OpenDev. OpenDev is basically taking the project infrastructure that we built to sustain the development of OpenStack and making it more obviously available to other open source projects out there under a name that does not imply you become a part of OpenStack or anything. So it's basically a new domain, and we're moving our project infrastructure to that new domain in order to be able to promote our open development model beyond just OpenStack. So that was what openly developing means. Open infrastructure. What does that buzzword mean? Let's split it. Let's first explain what I mean by infrastructure. So traditionally, you would represent applications like this. You would have users on one side and applications on the other. But the way you deliver those applications has been evolving. So 20 years ago, when I started doing this, you would procure some physical hardware, and then you would deploy your operating system on that, your dependencies, and your applications on top of that. But we kept on adding new layers. The first one is obviously hardware virtualization. Basically means you abstract the server your application is running on from the physical hardware that happens to run it. And then we added cloud APIs on top of that. So APIs that sit on top of those virtualization resources to allow programmatically accessing those virtualized resources. So you have programmable infrastructure on the bottom and applications that are aware of those programmatic APIs to cloud-native applications, basically, that can run on top of cloud APIs. And then the game continues. We just added a new layer, which is the application deployment API layer, basically Kubernetes and other solutions, similar solutions that sit on top of those cloud APIs and provide higher level primitives for application deployers to be able to express their applications and deploy it. So you're getting the idea here, the movement that we've seen over the past 20 years. There is this growing separate role of providing infrastructure for others to be able to deploy and build things on. And that's where our focus is. It's on infrastructure providing for others to be able to deploy and develop and deploy their applications. That can be private or public. You can provide private infrastructure for anyone within your organization, or you can provide public infrastructure for anyone around the world with a credit card to take advantage of. So that's what infrastructure means. What does open infrastructure means? Well, quite obviously, that means open source solutions that you can use to provide infrastructure. And we think it's important. And the reason why we think it's important is that we do not really want a world where all of the world's infrastructure needs are provided by a couple of internet giants. This is not against AWS or Google or Microsoft. We're actually thrilled when they start adopting those open infrastructure technologies. It's really against the concentration of technology in the hands of a few. I think open infrastructure is all about enabling everyone to access those infrastructure providing technologies and not have them in the hands of a very few number of organizations. So that's what open infrastructure is. It's a massive space. So in order to focus our action a bit, the OpenStack Foundation came up with a number of focus areas. The first one is data center cloud. That's the traditional space that OpenStack has been addressing. Beyond that, we want to support edge computing. When you start distributing compute power closer to where those resources are actually consumed, you have to obviously, interoperability and standards will play a very important role as you move around and have to jump from one edge provider to another edge provider. So we think open source has a great role to play there, and we want to facilitate that. Container infrastructure is another of those focus areas. Basically, if you start integrating containers in open infrastructure, you need to look at it end-to-end from bare metal to the container with a strong focus on security, and that's what we're trying to enable here. Continuous integration and continuous deployment, going from code being written by developers to services being accessible by users. And finally, we added recently a new one on artificial intelligence and machine learning because it drives massive demands on compute power. So making sure that open infrastructure is best placed to serve those gigantic needs in resources is also a very important focus for us. So in some cases, we realize while serving those focus areas that there is a piece of technology that is missing. And at that point, we are encouraging formation of open collaboration around those missing pieces of technology. And that's what the projects that we support at the OpenStack Foundation are for. Ideally, they would help with multiple of our focus areas. You might realize that OpenStack has a role to play in every of the OpenStack Foundation focus areas, and that's not it's not random. We encourage those projects to have their specific technical leadership. They are not placed under the heel of the OpenStack technical leadership. They can form as sister communities around us. And we go from a pilot project to confirmed projects. We are trying to set up those projects as open collaboration and see if that takes on. And if it takes on, then we can go through a confirmation process that will decide if the OpenStack Foundation is committing long-term resources to the support of that project, or if it's better to just leave that community be without support from the OpenStack Foundation. We have a number of pilot projects right now. Kata Containers is a secure container runtime, basically combining the speed of containers with the isolation properties of VMs. And I won't talk more about it because just after lunch we have a presentation by Graham Whaley on Kata Containers, so I invite you to see that. We have Zool. Zool is a continuous integration framework that was created to support the scale of OpenStack development, and it uses advanced features like speculative gating and cross-project dependencies. And again, I won't talk that much about it because I think after the afternoon break, we have a talk by Monty Taylor, who will go into deep detail on what Zool is and does. We have two other projects that are slightly further away from the confirmation step. Airship is framework to deploy open infrastructure. So you declaratively describe the infrastructure that you want to see, and Airship just makes it happen and takes your requirements and deploy them potentially in a remote site. So it's a very interesting project for us because, like I said, provisioning open infrastructure, the first step is still a barrier to adoption. And finally, Starling X. Starling X is an opinionated distribution of OpenStack and other open source tools that is dedicated to edge and industrial IoT use cases. So the thing that is very important to realize here is that open infrastructure just goes way beyond the projects that the OpenStack Foundation ends up supporting. Our goal here is to facilitate open infrastructure, not to collect projects or be exclusive. That's why we started to encourage those OpenInfra Days so that we can invite other open source, open infrastructure communities to come present their software, discuss with us integration, and be in the same venue to discuss all of that together. Because we will not do this alone. So that's why today at the OpenInfra Days UK, you will learn about the OpenStack Foundation supported projects, obviously, but you will also learn about Ansible or Ceph, or the CNCF projects, or Consul, or Docker, or Eclipse JMO, Istio, Kubernetes, OpenCompute, OpenHPC, Terraform, and I'm pretty sure I forgot some by when I scanned the schedule. So my apologies if I missed your project there. I won't spend more time. I know that the schedule is tight, so I hope that you will have a great time talking about open infrastructure today. And I hope that you will help us openly develop open infrastructure. Thank you.